Parliamentary Reporters Dictation number 36 at the speed of 160 words per minute from Kailash Chandra. Shortened transcription number 109, 110. Last 5 seconds. Ready? Start. There are many important records that are left in the hands of various organizations of the country, such as the municipalities, the corporations, the different commercial organizations of the country, the chambers of commerce, etc. As has been mentioned by some honorable members here, some are also lying in private hands. The Government of India cannot be held responsible for the management and preservation of these records until Parliament passes the necessary legislation declaring these records as records of national importance. Under these circumstances, we presume that the resolution of the honorable member covers only those records which lie in the custody of the Government of India, the Archives of India, and the different ministries of the central government. It is true that some of the records are also lying with the state governments on loan. Sir, these records, in my opinion, can be divided into three groups. The first group is the records which are owned by the Government of India, which are created by the Government of India by the different ministries of the Government of India. The second group is the records which have been presented to the archives of India, as are the Bhopal records. The records of the Bhopal government, the former Bhopal government, have been presented to the archives of India. And the third category is of those records which are purchased by the Indian archives. There is of course the fourth variety, as has been pointed out by my honorable friend, the mover of the resolution, that a large number of records of the central government are lying with the state governments. These records have been given on loan to the state governments because they are connected with the administration of those states. They are necessary for carrying out the day-to-day administration of those states. That is why it has not been thought proper to take away those records from the states. They are lying with the states, but the proprietorship, the ownership rests with the Government of India. Sir, one thing I may impress upon this house: although all these records are properties of the Government of India, they belong to the Government of India and they are managed by the Government of India. Although legally speaking they are managed by the Government of India by executive action, like factually speaking they are not so. There is the organization to which a reference has been made by my honorable friends, the Indian Historical Records Commission. This commission is there to give its guidance and expert advice to the Government of India for the maintenance of these records. Sir, my honorable friend, the mover of this resolution, is thoroughly acquainted with this organization because he happens to be a member of that organization. Sir, the Indian Historical Records Commission is a body set up by a resolution of the Government of India in the year 1919. The functions and authority of the commission have been made clear in the resolution itself. This Indian Historical Records Commission, which supervises and guides the activities of the archives of India and the management of Indian government records, is a consultative and advisory body, but the vast majority of members of this body are drawn from sources other than the Government of India. The present constitution of the Indian Historical Records Commission is the Minister of Education, the Secretary of the Education Ministry, the Director of Archives, and 5 members nominated by the Government of India. In addition to that, there are 25 representatives of the 25 state governments of this country. There are 27 representatives of the 27 universities of India. There are 12 representatives of the 12 top ranking research institutions of this country. Actually, government servants, if we can call them, are only 3: the Minister of Education, the Secretary of the Education Ministry, and the Director of Archives. 5 members are nominated by government, the rest are drawn from other sources. This is the body, sir, that has been appointed under the resolution of the Government of India to give expert advice for the management of these matters. Sir, this body has got 2 other adjuncts: the Research and Publication Committee, which looks after the research and publications of the Indian archives, and the Local Records Subcommittee, which looks after the transference of records from their parent bodies, that is their creative agencies, the different ministries of the Government of India, to the archives. Then this body, the Local Records Subcommittee, also looks after indexing and cataloging of the records, and thirdly weeding of the records also. So what I am laboring to impress upon the honorable members of this house is that in every step, every activity of the Indian archives, the government of India is guided by some expert bodies. Sir, the Indian Historical Records Commission meets once in every year and they survey, scrutinize and examine in great detail the activities of the archives of India. Perhaps the ground they have covered during the last 5 years, the subjects upon which they have made recommendations, will convince this honorable house about the interest that is taken by this body. Sir, the Indian Historical Records Commission have advised the Government of India during the last few years about matters relating to the Regional Survey Committee, establishment of records offices in India, classification of historical documents, and inspection of records, preservation of archives. These are only a few of the many aspects of the activities of the Indian archives that have been surveyed and upon which recommendations have been made by the Indian Historical Records Commission during the last few years. Sir, I do not want to say that all the recommendations that have been made by the Indian Historical Records Commission have been implemented by the Government of India, but what I do say, sir, is that barring a few which could not be implemented either on financial grounds or for other reasons. Mr. Vice Chairman, I wish to make a few observations of a general nature on the appropriation bill. I know that this is an appropriation bill and not the finance bill, but perhaps it is permissible to make a reference to the policies which underlie this bill. The bill in its broad feature is having regard to all the circumstances that prevail in this country, a reasonable measure and deserving all the support of this house. We are left behind 200 years back in the struggle for life. The industrial revolution bypassed us. We are now in the atomic age and we have somehow or other, if we wish to exist as a decent country in the world, to make up for lost time. We have to provide for our people a higher standard of living, and that higher standard of living we can provide only by increasing production, and increased production involves increased expenditure. You cannot have increased expenditure without heavy taxation, and it is inevitable therefore that the tendency to tax more and more should increase with the expansion of states activities. We wish to usher in a socialist economy. Let us be clear as to what we mean by a socialist economy. We have heard a great deal about the private sector and the public sector. Well, we have got a mixed system of economy, and I suppose we have to be fair to the private sector, but there is just one thing about it that you must be clear about. In a socialist economy, the direction of investment and the control of investment must rest in the hands of the state. In a socialist economy, the public sector must dominate the private sector. All this is vital for a socialist economy. I was glad for that reason to find, as an ordinary citizen who was engaging himself in legal studies, that we have nationalized life insurance. I hope we shall maintain and continue that policy. I can see no alternative to expansion of state activity in all directions that concern the common man. It is only in some such way that we shall be able to provide employment to our hungry millions. Of course, it doesn't mean that every tax is a good tax, as one who rather likes to be described as a socialist. I have a little objection to indirect taxation. I think the better way to deal with the problem of taxation is to tax those who are in a position to bear the burden of taxation. We find the richer classes always saying that the taxation is very heavy. Even if the taxation was moderate, they would say it was heavy. But it is extraordinary that when once a tax of a direct nature has been levied, the industry is able ultimately to adjust itself to the conditions imposed by the tax, and therefore we have to do a little dynamic thinking in these mean that every item of taxation is a right item. Personally, I agree with my honorable friend that a tax on salt or a tax on food grains is not perhaps an ideal tax. It is not a right tax, and it should be levied, if it has to be levied at all, with extreme moderation. But my general point of view is that I would favor more direct taxation and less indirect taxation. May I just say that planning needs trained personnel We cannot in the 20th century compete with the advanced countries of the world without trained personnel, and it is for that reason I am a little worried as one who has been connected with education for well over 35 years in my state about the rapid fall in our university standards. Now I speak with some knowledge of this question. I have been connected as an examiner with many Indian universities. I know them. I am in contact with our young men, and it is very painful for me to find that they are not able to express themselves today in any language whatever. It is not as if they are able to express themselves very well in Hindi. I should be happy if they were able to express themselves well in Hindi, but the distressing feature is that the vast majority of our students are not well up in their studies, and the tragedy is that they are not able to express themselves in any language properly. Of course there is overcrowding in the universities. I am not complaining against this overcrowding, and I think education is the birthright of every student. I visualize a time when education in all its aspects will be as free as the air that we breathe. The only thing that we should require or we should demand is the capacity to profit by higher education. Higher education must not be made too expensive for the poor. After all, the unfortunate section of the community has a right to a better deal, but what I am worried about is the fall in standards. We cannot ignore the claims of expansion, and there has been a considerable expansion of secondary education in our state. I think it is right that there should be this expansion. The question, however, is how are we going to reconcile the claims of expansion with the claims of efficiency? I am all in favor of diversification of our educational system, but by mere diversification of education, you will not be able to solve the problem of unemployment among the educated unemployed. You will merely substitute a class of specialist unemployed for the general unemployed today. How are you going to tackle this problem? I think it is unnecessary for us to insist upon uniformity of standards in all our higher educational institutions in the country. The view has also been put forward by the ministry that there should be uniformity of standards in all the universities. Stop.